Alright, lads and lasses, and welcome back to the traditional Yorkshire Dialect podcast. In this week's episode, we're going to take a look at arguably Yorkshire Dialect's most famous, well-loved and most celebrated poet, John Hartley. John Hartley was born in Halifax in 1839 in the West Riding of Yorkshire. He was known for his poems and poetry anthologies, such as Yorkshire Pudding, and his stories like Tsetse Paris and Tsetse London. John Hartley gained county-wide fame as the editor of the original illuminated Clock Almanac, which he edited from 1866 until his death in 1915. Hartley's work was loved for countless reasons. His work dealt with a variety of different topics from unemployment to romance, but his documentation of daily life during the emerging world of the Industrial Revolution really highlights the poverty and harsh reality of the living conditions at the time. For those of us in the present interested in such a time, Hartley's work not only serves as a source of entertainment, but also as a source of local and national history. In his book, Tsetse Paris, for example, his story takes place in Paris before the construction of the Eiffel Tower. It's so strange to think that one of the most commonly associated French monuments in the modern day didn't even exist at the point when Hartley's story was set. His works also show us that while we live in a world abundant with technology, the same trials and tribulations of love, poverty, politics, and the general mundane goings-on of daily life were not too dissimilar from our own in the present day. I'm now going to read some information taken from the biography done by the late Reverend and ex-secretary and editor of the Yorkshire Dialect Society, John Waddington Feather, in his book, The Best of John Hartley. In addition to this, I've also reworded some of the information in order to condense it for the purpose of this podcast. John Hartley was born on the 19th of October 1839 at 7 Bedford Street in Halifax. His father was a tea merchant and a draper, and his mother was a staunch Quaker. He received some formal schooling as a child, and at age 12 began an apprenticeship as a designer in worsted tapestries at James Ackroyd & Sons. He worked there for over 20 years until leaving for America in 1872 and returning in 1875. You can read more about Hartley's antics in America in his book Grimes's Trip to America. Before moving to America, however, Hartley took over the editorship of the Clock Almanac from James Bland in 1866, as the creator of the Clock Almanac, Alfred Wilson, was so impressed by Hartley's poetry that he decided to pass the editorship on to him. It's also worth mentioning that Wilson originally established the Clock Almanac as an advertising journal, and Hartley's first edition came out in 1866 and sold 5,000 copies within a few weeks. Although little is known about Hartley's private life, he appears to have been married twice. His first marriage appeared to be a tempestuous one, as Waddington Feather describes, but his second marriage appears to have been a happy one. His second wife, Sophia Ann Wilson, was the daughter of the creator of the Clock Almanac, and is most likely the inspiration for the character Mally in Hartley's work. Hartley's lived in many different places, including Leeds, London, and the US, of course, but at the time of his death in 1915, he was living in Cheshire. Now, back to my blitherings. Hartley's written dialect is done so in a way that it's easy to read for natives and non-natives alike. While his dialect spelling does vary, he keeps in his H's and other letters which help to remove the ambiguity for readers from outside of Yorkshire. Now I would go as far to say that Hartley's dialect, while based on forms from earlier writers, is the closest we have to a concept of standard written Yorkshire. More on this in a future video. So without further ado, I'm now going to read you a couple of poems in the best possible way that I can. This first poem is called Aght, Wark, and if you know your dialect, it means out of work or unemployed. I've been laking for almost 8 weeks, and I can't get a day's work to do. I've trailed about streets while I'm sick, and I've worn me clog soils almost through. I've a wife and 3 children to 'em, and I know they're all looking at clock, for they think it's high time I should come and bring 'em a morsel of jock. Eh, dear, it's a pitiful case, when cupboard is empty and bare, when want's stamped over every face, and you haven't even a meal you can share. Today as I walked into street, Squire's carriage came rattling past, and I thought that it hardly looked right, for he hadn't even broken me fast. Them hosses I knew very weel, with the trappings all shining i gold. They'd never known want of a meal, or a shelter to keep 'em through cold. Even dogs have enoughin to spare, though they never worked a day the life. But the maisters forgot they should care for a chap that's 3 bairns and a wife. They give dinners at Thor livery neat, and there's carriages standing bit skewer, and all windows are blazing wi' leet, but they seldom give dinners to poor. In me pocket I haven't a rap, nor a crust nor a handful of mail, and unless we can get it at strap, we mun pine or mun beg or else stale. But to onwards I'll point me old clogs, to them 3 little lambs and the dam. I wish there were hosses or dogs, for it's nobbut poor folk it's to clam. But they say there is one that can see, and has promised to guide us safe through. So I'll live on he hopes, and surely he'll find a chap summat to do. All right, so this poem is called Come Thee Ways. Bonny lassie, come thee ways, and let us go together. Though we've met with stormy days, there'll be some sunny weather. And if joy should spring for me, thou shalt freely share it. And if trouble ever comes to thee, well, I can help to bear it. Though thee mammy says as nay, and thee dad's unwilling, would to have me pine away with this love that's killing. Come thee ways and let me twine me arms once more about thee. Weel thou knows me heart is thine, I couldn't live without thee. Every day an hour it slips, some pleasure we are missing, for them bonny rosy lips I'm never stalled a kissing. If men were wise to walk life's track without such joys to glad 'em, he must ha' made a sad mistake 'at gave an Eve to Adam. And this next poem, which will be our last poem for today, is called Our Mary's Bonnet. Have you seen Our Mary's bonnet? It's a stunner and no mistake. There's a bunch of roses on it, and a feather down her back. Yellow ribbon and fine laces, and a cock-a-doodle-doo, and around her bonny face is a string of posies blue. When she went to church last Sunday, parson couldn't find his text, and fat old Mrs. Grundy said, "Ah, Mary, pray what next?" Lads winked at one another, and lasses sniggered i' the glee, and thole at congregation had a bonnet i' their ee. Then choir started singing, and first hymn at they sang were all about the flowers of 50 summers gone. And when they saw our Mary, they made a mullock on it, for they thought that all them flowers had been put on our Mary's bonnet. Then parson said most kindly there were no offence intended, that flower shows were out of place in church we a saints attended. And if his erring sister wished to find a way to glory, well, she shouldn't carry on her eared a whole conservatory. Now our Mary ain't short of pluck, she jumped up in a minute. She looked as if she'd swallowed church, and everybody in it. "Parson," she said, "your ear is bare, nought in it and nought on it. Suppose you put some flowers there, like these that's on my bonnet." I think it's also worth mentioning the little comment at Waddington Feather attaches to the end of this poem. It reads thus: "There is some doubt about Hartley's authorship of this poem, and I must record that I haven't seen it in any of his collections of verse. However, the dialect is certainly that of Hartley's area, and the orthography is close to that which Hartley uses. Elderly dialect reciters in the 1960s who knew Hartley when he was alive also attributed it to him and assured me that he wrote it. But anyway, that's everything for today, lads and lasses. I fair hope you've enjoyed today's podcast. Now, if you've made it this far, let us know what you think down in comments. And if you'd like to learn more about the life of John Hartley, then I can highly recommend The Best of John Hartley mentioned in this video. Or I'll be happy to do some further readings from it, copyright permitting of course. But for now, I wish you all a pleasant evening wherever you are, and I'll catch you next time.